Butler. Welcome to the Butler Did It, putting Jenkins to work for you. I work with Xeno Media, and I've been there about 3.5 years or so. I started working with Drupal in 2009. Started working in the web in 1995, writing straight HTML with a text editor, and wrote my first line of code long time ago, 1979, before personal computers were around. I have a passion for automation and having the computer take care of things that I don't necessarily need to, so I can work on other things. Kind of an overview of what we'll talk about. So the requirements, the plugins that I use for our process, some of the server-side setup items that you'll need, and then I walk through 3 of the jobs that we do, backing up a database from production with Jenkins, running module updates, and then multi-site or multi-branch build. So like pull requests, you can create a site based upon that. I don't get into all of the details with it, but there's enough there that you can parse it from. So in this scenario, you are a landowner, homeowner, and you're doing okay working on it, keeping things up, but you could use some extra help, so you decide to hire a butler. So there are many choices out there. Circle CI and Travis are probably the bigger 2 that people are using, and I know Jenkins has a big following as well. We ended up choosing Jenkins partially because it's open source and free, and you can play with it till your heart's content without bringing up the initial cost. So it's just for that. It will run on Windows, Mac, Linux, so it's pretty versatile on where it will run. It's pretty extensible with hundreds of plugins available. The community's been around for a while. And you can trigger Docker builds and things like that with it as well. So the plugins that we use on a regular basis are listed here. In addition to the recommendation plugin, a few that I'll point out: the build name setter allows you to take parameters of the job and rename the build. So if you have a common job that's coming in, instead of just saying job 100 ran, you can say or change the name of the job to the client or the project that you're working on, so that when you're reporting on it, you can say client 1 branch whatever ran, which is useful in your reporting later. The Slack plugin we use quite a bit to notify processes that are going on with Jenkins. We have some processes that run every day for certain things, and I wake up in the morning and quickly scan and look down and see if there's any red items. If it's all green, I'm done for the day. It's kind of nice. Throttle and lockable resources plugin allow you to basically avoid collisions. So by naming parameters and things like that, you can make sure that you're not restoring the database when you're running behat tests. There are many ways to configure the user access. For our purposes of this, everyone's an admin. You can get into fine-grained control and role control and things like that, but that's beyond the scope of what I'm going to talk about today. And then other setup items that you'll need. Jenkins allows you to build template files. So you don't have your Gits, or you don't have your settings file, or at least your local settings file in Git. So you can create a parameter or a page for that, pass parameters for what your database and site are to fill that out as you go. htaccess, if you've got anything custom per job, you can bring that in. So basically, anything that your site needs that's not in Git, that you can create a template for and generate that out. If you are using the Slack API or any environment variables that you need set up, on the configure page is generally where you set all those up. And you'll want to put those in Jenkins as opposed to your Git code for obvious reasons. It's more secure, and it can pull those variables in. And then helper scripts on the server, if you're running Drush commands, Composer, Node.js, so whatever you are wanting to run through Jenkins, you need to make sure it's accessible to the Jenkins user on your server. And then there's a couple custom scripts that are linked out that you can, when you get the slides, you can kind of look through those and see what we're doing there. So with that, once you've got everything configured, you're ready to create your first job. When creating a job, in the name field, you want to think like I forgot the name of the module. Sorry. The path auto settings, because that will become your URL. So you can put a regular string in there, but then you get the %20 all the time in your URLs. You can give it a nice name later. And the two jobs that we mainly use are the freestyle project and the multi-branch pipeline. There are other things that you can explore on your own. And then, so walking through the job, you've got the tabs across the top. So general, your source code management. In the first example, we don't have displayed here. I don't have an example of that, but I can show you later if you're curious. The build triggers, environment variables, what you're building, and then any post-processing that you do. So like if you're running behat, you can put the JUnit flag and then report that information through Jenkins instead of having to parse through the raw text that behat will output. So on the general tab, the first thing that I would always set up is discard old builds. Jenkins can get sluggish if you never discard old builds. I like to keep 5 around. Depending upon your needs, you might want to keep more or less, and depending upon the job as well. I mentioned throttling builds. So not pictured here is the lock plugin where you can provide a named. But in this case, for the database backup, we throttle to 2 an hour. That way, because I mentioned earlier, we have a Slack command that somebody can run the database. We don't want them flooding the system. It will limit them to 2 per hour. So even if you do 4 commands in 10 minutes, it will run the first one, and then half an hour later run one, and then stop, because it doesn't add any more to the queue. So it's kind of a nice way to limit what's going on with the server. Scheduling. So on the build triggers, for database backup, we usually do 2 ways to trigger it. One is through a token. So with the Slack command, we pass the token into the build or into the Slack command, which triggers a webhook, which then fires off the job. And then the other is on cron. One thing that Jenkins has, which is cron, which I'd love to see ported over to regular cron, is if you see in there's an H, Jenkins will take a hash of the build name and create a number, in this case between 0 and 59, and decide when to run the job. So it will run sometime within the hour and spread all of your jobs. So if you want to run everything at the 1 o'clock hour and you've got 60 jobs, it will spread the load on its own. And then skipping over down to the build phase. Why did my monitor die? Okay, there we go. So within the build phase for the database backup, we're just simply running the shell command. So if you've ever SSH out to the server, run SQL dump and dump it to a file, that's exactly what we're doing. And then we're SCPing the file down. We're just doing it through SSH-T, which allows you to run remote commands. So it kind of keeps everything local. And then we recently switched over to this. There is a plugin that allows you to run remote commands, but if it errors, it doesn't report back to Jenkins. It doesn't send you the error code. So switching over to this, we can know if something fails in the process. And then we, SCP it down to a common location on our server. And then the Slack plugin, I probably should have expanded to the advanced, but you can set a custom message, choose the channel that you want to go to if it's different than the default for the server. And then we notify on start, fail, and when it's complete. So, and if you've never set up a Slack command, this is the screen that does it. I don't know if you need to be an admin to do it. I know I am, so if you're not an admin in your Slack, if you're using Slack, check with somebody who is, and they can add the command for you. And we use getDB and then the client name, and then there's the build hook, and then the token that we're using, and you want to make sure to use post when you're submitting the command. And I'll do a demo of that later. So once you have your database backup, then you can maybe start thinking about moving on to Drupal updates. So build a site locally or just run Drupal updates. We have a Jira, we use Jira for our ticketing, and I wrote a custom module for Drupal 7 so far that will create a ticket for each module that needs updating and the core, so that we can, through Jira, say we want to update views, but maybe not update something else. Because maybe we patched it and we want to do that manually, but we at least want to be aware of it within the system. Excuse me. So Jenkins then, our Jira then passes parameters to the build, and we parse those. So we've got the module that's being updated, and then a Jira issue key so that we can do that back. So we can post back to Jira that it's complete and what the status is. And then we also pass the summary, so which the summary would contain the version number of the build that it recommends and that sort of, or the module that it recommends. And then, so this is the script. This is all we do, which is a shell command. We parse the variables and decide if it's a core update or a module update. If it's a core update, we have a custom script that I link to in the slides of where we got it from. We made some modifications to it, but that'll take the version number of Drupal that you're updating. This works for 7, 8, you're going to use Composer. But it'll take the version number of the Drupal that you're updating, remove the readmes, the install files, and things like that that you normally don't include in Git, and then run updates on the rest of the site. Or in the case of if it's just a module, we run drush up and then the module name. So it's just doing that one module at a time. And then we run one more shell command, which the git status porcelain will tell you if the git branch is clean. So if there's any changes, it rolls that up into commit. If not, then maybe the site was updated some other way. There was an error, there was an issue, whatever the case may be. And we put the ticket number and an update message into the commit message. So it's pretty generic. You can customize the template as you want based on the variables that you're doing. And then we also notify Slack and various other things. I'm trying not to show everything with every slide, of course. And then the next piece, the bigger piece, is scripted pipeline, and that's using multi-branch pipeline. So that's where I mentioned you can take your pull requests, or if you're using a different system, anytime you create a branch, if your system has a webhook that can ping Jenkins that the repo has been updated, it can pull the repo for any new branches and build a site based upon that branch and that parameter, that script. So here is the script shell, so to speak. So you import any variables you need. It's written in Groovy. So any includes you need, there's only 2 that are really required, and I'll show that on another slide. Any properties of the job that you're creating, and I'll do a demo of where you can actually build out that script so you don't have to remember it every single time. Any variables that you want to run, so like where to find the database, what's the name of the site, what username to create for the database, those sort of things. We build out the site, run some tests, and then the deploy script. So I will break each one of those down here. So on the import properties, our import and properties section of that, so like I said, there's only 2 that we're really including, which is the environment variables and the core for Jenkins. Jenkins used to be named Hudson before it was forked. And then the properties for the build. And in this case, we're keeping 7 days around or 5 builds, whichever one's more active. And then the other properties of the site, depend upon what you're doing, how often to throttle, what to throttle on, and that sort of thing. And then in the variable section, so before the variable, you see the start of the node. The node is the actual job that gets created within Jenkins. That's the process. So everything is wrapped within the node. And then the variable that we are passing, your get repo, database information, that sort of thing. And then we pass that to a pre-built job that we defined before. We have one for Drupal 7 we're working on for Drupal 8, bringing that into this system, and one for WordPress, so that we can just call the global builds Drupal site build, and then pass it what the Git repository is, what the database is, and that job runs separate and builds everything out and then reports back to the script. Oh, one other thing here, here's where we start the lock as well. So each repo will put the repo name in for the lock, so that we can base anything that we're doing for that site based upon that name. The build stage runs only once per branch. So we're not creating the site every single time. During the config stage, common things that we do every time, the Git message, like I said, is where we grab the Git log, so that we can report on it later, what the commit was. And then within the site directory, run drush update, clear databases, feature revert, run any commands that you want to run on every commit, because the code has changed. And then every commit we're running tests on, so we're at least running behat on every test. We're not running like xdebug or some of the longer running tasks on every test, but you can, through parameters, define what branch you're on, and if it's master, run more tests, and add any command line things here. And you can see that we've got the format JUnit, and then outside we run the JUnit build, and I'll show you what that looks like when we get. And then the final stage is deploy. So if it's master, using the timeout, we have it set for 4 days. So what that will do is pause the build, and then it'll actually release the job so that other processes can run. And then you have 4 days to respond, proceed, or abort. If nobody responds within that time frame, the job aborts and no deploy happens. So that will allow you to review the site manually if you need to look it over, or if you trust it because it's a hot fix or something like that, just click proceed and run your deploy script. Or if it's anything else, just continue on, because it's a staging server for that point. So in the GUI, once you've got the multi-site set up and have a few branches in, you'll start seeing basically a job for every branch. So we have the master branch, and then, in this case, 4 separate features that are being worked on. And I can tell just by the cloud, so the W column is the weather of the job. It takes the last 5 builds and basically gives you a weather report. So sometime in the last 5 builds, masters failed twice. I know that because I see the clouds every day. So if the last 4 or 5 build, then you get dark clouds and thunderstorms, and so. And then this is drilled into the master branch, and I've captured a screenshot of what the deploy and abort looks like. It nicely creates a column for each of the stages that you're working on. So we have 4 stages. You could do 2 stages, 3 stages, 20 stages, depending upon the level of intricacy that you want to add to your script. And then it will always pause on that last stage where it's waiting for input to run whatever process that you're going to do. And then up in this area is the behat results. In this particular case, there's 13 tests that are being run on this site. So relatively small, but covers the basics as well, and everything is passed. If there had been any failures, then you'd see a red area. So you might see a red peak in the middle where something failed with the behat before it was corrected. And then you have your series of past builds. So in this case, the last 3 have all passed. This is what the Slack notifications look like. So there's 3 of them. The first one, and this is on a master branch. So the first one has the alert. You can see I'm alerted and one other person. We've got the build number. This is a link back to the build itself if you wanted to look at the raw Jenkins files, what happened with it. A link to your deploy page is included, and then the commit with who wrote it. And if you expand more, you get the details that are written out in the commit, however good the commit message was. Once approved, we send a note back to Slack to say that it has approved. So if you have multiple people that could deploy, they know that it's been approved and they don't have to do anything because somebody else is taking care of it. And then this third message is from DeployBot that everything's completed and it's gone live. So whatever changes may be. So with that, we will do a short little demo. So with the database backup, it's really just a matter, if I drive into this and say build now, actually one thing I didn't show you, which tab over here. So if you see, I have the database DB demo was run at 8 o'clock this morning. The server that it happens to be on is GMT time. And if I do a list, you can see that it was just updated. So it doesn't take a whole lot to process. And if you drill in, you can see the commands that are run. So this is your raw log output of what happened. And then your history of the builds show up down here. So like I said, we keep the last 5. So if it failed or something, you can drill in and try to see why it failed. And then the other demo I wanted to show, so with the multi-branch D7. So in this case, we've got our master and three features that are set up. If we come out here, and if I do, I should have it in my history. So the current branches that we have, we're currently on master, and we have 3 branches. If I just do a get checkout -b, I can type C-A-M-P. Oops.
Checkout.
Yep.
So it's not just me that does that.
No, it's not. And then get push origin MidCamp. So that branch is out remote. If I go back to Jenkins, normally we have a webhook set up, but since it's local on a Drupal VM and I'm using my phone, that's not going to happen. So if I refresh the build down here, it starts building the MidCamp, and you can see it's calling the global build. And within a few moments, we'll see here in the list of folders that we have a new folder being created called MidCamp Master, or MidCamp because the Git repo is MidCamp. And using Apache virtual host, you can actually have your folder structure become the first part of your domain, so you can set up your staging server to just dynamically pull, and you don't have to rebuild your server every time you do a deploy. So in this process, it pulls down the database, sets everything up, and creates a Slack message there too. So one of the things I mentioned that I will show, so if you're working with pipelines, and sorry if I went too quick, on a pipeline build, the pipeline syntax is a great help. So I will show you properties. So if you're creating properties of the job, like I mentioned, you've got discard old builds, and we can set that to 5. You can say to GitHub project, throttle concurrent builds, 1 per hour, build periodically if you want. And then if you generate pipeline script, right there is your properties that you can just paste into your code. So if it's, and I won't actually hit build, but the Slack send plugin has what the message is, so that could be a variable. The color, Slack nicely has good, warn, and danger. If you pass those variables, it will do your red, yellow, and green. Slash token, you want to set that as or your Slack token, you want to set that as a variable. If you do it from here, the reason why I won't click generate is it will actually put that in your Jenkins file. You don't want to do that because your Jenkins file is in Git, and then suddenly your Slack API is exposed. So you can do that to generate your file, but then replace your token with a variable. And you can tell it which I don't know, I keep looking over there, which channel that you want to post it to. So you can either have one channel that's all your deploys or one per client, depending upon your needs or setup. Oh, and here's the admin, or you can see too. Did it refresh? Maybe not. But that it probably did create it. It's just not refreshing nicely. Create the database as part of that build process. So that is some of the things that we do with Jenkins. You know, and of course you want to ask yourself, what can Jenkins do for you, or me in that case? But remember, with automating, this wonderful wisdom of XKCD, that you can certainly spend a lot of time diving down a deep rabbit hole. So you've got to adjust, you know, expectations and do it in pieces. Don't try to do everything at once. So here is, I joined in, and questions. Yes?
You mentioned Drupal VM. Was that just local, or is Jenkins running a big one out?
Just local.
Okay.
You could, I mean, you can run Jenkins on a Drupal VM, but it's kind of a waste of resources when you can get our staging servers, one of the $80 DigitalOcean boxes, so we've got a little more, we've got 4 CPUs with it. I didn't mention one of the configurations that you want to set with Jenkins is it have at least 2 processors, because as you saw with the build that I was doing, that one job created another job. If you don't have at least 2 processors, you can't call out to other jobs. But try to cap it at the number of CPUs, cores that you have available. So in that case, our staging server, we've got 4 processors that we're running. You can run more if you've got, you know, if you've got the means, or spread the load between different boxes. You know, so don't put all your Jenkins jobs on one basket. And a Jenkins job, sorry, I'm going off on a tangent, but a Jenkins job is just an XML file. So you can port a job from one place to another or clone it and then make some changes pretty easily. So, other questions?
Do you know if there's a way to like move Jenkins projects to like logical Drupal projects? Like for example, you have like your pipeline, you might have like some deployment project or something, and like you want to think of those all as like the name of the Drupal project.
Well, sort of. So I didn't mention it, but in the new item section, one of the things that you can do is create a folder. Yeah.
How do I get that on my Jenkins?
I don't know. There might be a folder plugin.
All right.
So with that folder plugin, then you can group either like jobs together. So what we have, you know, in this global builds, you can see we've got an init site and a WP init site.
That is awesome.
So all of our global builds are in one location. All of our database backups are in one location. And then what we do, I don't put, although you can, I personally don't put the multi-site or multi-branch items in a folder because it in and of itself becomes a folder. You can, but then you're just drilling further down. So that's all up to however you want to configure it in that regard.
I was going to say there's only one other functionality compared to the folders, depending on how you visually want to look at it, and those are those tabs across the top.
Yes, you can group things by tabs. I've tried to play with it, but I've unsuccessfully got them to filter. So I just have one big list. So
The one server that we had set up, we had set it up so that a different team only had access to certain builds.
right.
And also certain tabs within the, like certain tabs.
Right, and that's certainly something that, you know, if you, depending upon who's accessing the server, you certainly want to do more than everybody's an admin. But we're 13 people in the team, and there's 3 of us that are actively working with Jenkins. So we're not to the level that we need to start locking things down too much.
I've put off working with Jenkins, Travis, and SourceFly, etc. Have you worked with enough of the others that have any brief comparison?
I have not. I would say the biggest comparison that I've between them, Jenkins, you generally host yourself. So that means, you know, the software in and of itself is free, all the plugins are free, but your time to configure it is not, your server is not free. But if you're doing more than the services offer, You know, a lot of them, from what I've seen, and this is speaking out of inexperience with them, they're for testing your project before it goes live, reporting on the tests, and deploy. So Jenkins can do all of that, and then some if, you know, we have it managing our staging server. You know, you might be able to do that with Circle CI to say fire up a box if there's a new branch, or Travis, I don't know. But you might need more than the lower tiers. Somebody mentioned, I think it was you mentioned, you're running Travis and at the two processes level and haven't had any collisions.
Yeah, so we're using Travis CI. We started with Jenkins, and that whole having to host it and pay for our Microsoft Azure instance, we knew was going to get pretty expensive.
Yeah.
So we switched over to using Travis, and then Travis is the whole step through pre-process, pre-scripting, the whole 9 yards, and then just being in one file. And then when you're done, you can choose to deploy or do whatever you want with that. It includes the same integrations. And the only difference is that your UI to look at it is, depending on whether that is a public or private repo, is travisci.com or not.
Yeah.
And all the variables and stuff that you use for Travis, you put into their UI, and you can do the same thing when it comes to security. Like, you can make sure that they're hashed variables before you even store them up there in their site.
Yeah. Good. It might be worth looking into at some point, but this is
Yeah,
my
the biggest
wheelhouse.
difference is hosting. So
Yeah.
we pay, I think it's around 200 something a month for 2 concurrent builds, and we've got 8 projects that are running on it.
Yeah.
Doing pretty much the exact same thing, and none of them have really spun up the queue. And so in theory, if you got one really good server, you're paying $80 a month, we would kind of be even at 4 builds.
Yeah, we've got our staging server currently has about 6 projects that are using this multi-site workflow. We just finalized it and we're rolling it out. In the end, we'll have about 20. So we'll see if we hit that limit. You know, unfortunately, the next jump with DigitalOcean doubles to 160. So at that point, you know.
There's the other option too, and that's something that my brother wanted me to try. And there's the difference between basically adding slave machines.
Yeah.
To take care of everything for you, but that gets a little bit more into the advanced side of Jenkins. And so you can have multiple smaller servers that
Right.
are cheaper as the slave machines for your master Jenkins. So whenever the build kicks off, it just kicks off the build on the slave server.
Totally. So yeah, I've played a little bit with slave servers, but you can have Jenkins control an entire network of servers. So you could have a centralized Jenkins server, say if it's a Drupal 8 job, talk to my D7 box. If it's a Drupal 7 job, talk to my 5.6 box. If it's WordPress, talk to this. If it's CentOS, even talk to that. So you can have a central Jenkins control any type of server, you know, that you need, fire up different boxes. Kind of beyond what we're doing, but it might not be too far off for us at some point. Any other question? Yeah?
I know we talked about it, but did you set up any, if all the tests pass, then deploy to Pantheon and run the terminus commands yet?
We have not. The hurdle that I haven't had time to look at is behat tests and other tests. So Pantheon has a nice blog post of how to test WordPress through behat using their systems and everything. I want to see how easily that ports over to Drupal. So, because then you know, with that workflow, we would use Quicksilver to say when a push goes to test, tell Jenkins to run the tests on this. If it passes, then use Terminus to deploy to live. So that way you can still screw it up by manually pushing to production, but at least then you also have a log of who did that, because every Jenkins push will have a flag saying that this was an automated push. So you at least get blame if you know who broke your site. Assuming they broke your site, because maybe they don't. Any other questions?
Thanks.
Thank you.